Hello. Yeah. Hello and welcome. Maybe I should turn down the gain a bit. Is that better? No, that's higher. There we go. That's good. Hello. Welcome to the stream. Everybody. Hello, space. Welcome to the stream. 'Tis I, Chillpill. So I got spoopy music going on right now, but let's start, like we always do, with a few tongue twisters for a warm-up, shall we? Let's go ahead and stop all these videos and do this.
Attention passengers, as a
Oh,
reminder,
blah blah
during
blah
the
blah
flight,
blah
you
blah
will
blah
have
blah 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 blah
for an extra
blah.
fee.
There we go. All right. Oh boy. Okay. So here we go. I typed in workout music, Nintendo workout music, and this is what I got. So this is what we're going with. All right. Let us go. What kind of tongue twister should we do? Do-do-do. Do-do-do. Do-do. Do-do-do. Falcon Punch. Exactly. Let's see. 135. 135. Oh, you know what we should do? We should probably do the stupid face warm-ups first, huh? Hold on. Where is it? Exercising facial muscles. Let's see here. Alright. First things first. Number 1, raise your eyebrows as high as you can and hold for 5 seconds. So. 1. 2. 3. Alright. It's good. Open your mouth as wide as possible and stick your tongue out as far as you can. Hold for several seconds. Alright. 1. 2. 3. Using your 3 center fingers, press down on your cheeks and smile as hard as you can to raise your cheek muscles against your fingers. That's good. Move your nose as much as you can from side to side. I think I had trouble with this last time too. I can't wiggle my nose. I can just flare my nostrils. Blah. Lift your eyebrows as high as you can, open your eyes as wide as possible, and frown at the same time. Oh, this one. Oh god, this one's so stupid. Alright. Oh. Alright. Beautiful. Pucker your lips out as far as possible in the shape of an O, then change the expression into a wide smile. Repeat several times. It wants me to go. Ooh. Alright. What else you got? Music playlist. Alright. Sit in a comfortable chair and look up at the ceiling. Pucker your lips and stick your tongue out as far as possible to exercise your neck muscles. Oh god, this one too. Okay. So that's it for face warm-ups. Yada doo doo dee. Let's see. Personalization, mic technique, no. Vocal care, no. Allergies and sinus, no. More tongue twisters. Where was a good one? Promo, reality TV, no. Nope. Alright, here we go. These are good. Flip it. Statistically, statistics, statistically flip it. Numerical, numerals, numerically flip it. Political, politics, politically flip it. Regimental, regiments, regimentally flip it. Rudimentary, rudimental, rudiments, flip it. Detrimental, detriments, detrimentally flip it. Propaganda, propagate, populate, flip it. Propaganda, propagate, populate, flip it. Ugh. A baker man. A baker opened a cupcake shop in the center of a town. 1,000 cupcakes he did make and pass them all around. How many cupcakes do you think a baker man should bake? As many cupcakes as it takes to make a town feel great. Effervescent, magnificent. Effervescent, magnificent, the coolest words I ever met. Effervescent, magnificent, they feel so good to say. Effervescent, magnificent, the coolest words I ever met. Effervescent, magnificent, they brighten up my day. The Big Ship Rudy. Welcome aboard the great big ship where a seaman named Rudy jumped off for a dip. He swam all around the deep blue sea to see all the sights that he could see. What happened to Rudy, no one can say, cause he never returned on that cold winter day. So in his honor and praise of duty, they now call the ship the Big Ship Rudy. Rudy! Vader. Don't jump off the ship, Vader. It's not worth it. Terry Tunnell on Christmas Eve. Terry Tunnell told her teacher, Mr. Townsend. Okay. Terry Tunnell told her teacher, Mr. Townsend, to teach her how to tie a double knot in the tie of her little brother, 10-year-old Timothy Theodore Tunnell, so that they could both attend the 20th anniversary of the Tunnell family tree trimming service to be held at the Trinity Tabernacle Testimonial New Bethel Town Church on Tuesday, the 10th day of December, 14 days to the day of Christmas Eve, a typically totally terrific night to remember. Holy shit, what? Do that one again. Terry Tunnell told her teacher, Mr. Townsend, to teach her how to tie a double knot in the tie of her little brother, 10-year-old Timothy Theodore Tunnell, so that they could both attend the 20th anniversary of the Tunnell family tree trimming service to be held at the Trinity Tabernacle Testimonial New Bethel Town Church on Tuesday, the 10th day of December, 14 days to the day of Christmas Eve, a typically totally terrific night to remember. Yup. My goodness. Entrepreneurial. Wake up tomorrow and eat all your cereal. Entrepreneurial. Never give up on a dream. Entrepreneurial. Wake up tomorrow and eat all your cereal. Entrepreneurial. Never give up on a dream. Tiffle tag, The crazy U's. Utter under unicorn, usher user unsung, urchin Ulysses uptown, unity unit unbound, understanding untidy unrelenting untrue, undesirable unfit unimpressive unglue, unify undertake understand unwind, unite unseat unilaterally unkind, utmost upside untie undo, underneath upper under universal underuse. Whoop. Section 6, Building a Successful Career. I need more. Give me more. More, Snake. Hurt me more. Four-letter blends. Extravagant expression. Extravagant, extraordinary, extraction, expressive, express, expression, extract, excretion, explicit, explanation, explode, explosion, explain. Lunch, crunch. Lunch, punch, hunch, crunch, couch, ouch, pouch, crouch, much, such, crutch, touch, stench, trench, stench, trench, wrench, bench, search, church, perch, lurch, starch, march, parch, arch, fetch, catch, watch, match, hatch, patch, swatch, and latch. You-do-do. Rated PG-13. Some materials may be inappropriate for children under 13. Now playing in theaters everywhere. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. Some materials may not be suitable for children. Yeah. Flip-flapping. Flipping and flapping. Wishing and wanting. Dipping and dumping. Picking and popping. Fatty Betty titter-tatty. Sloppy floppy choppy hobby. Tick-tacky, tickle-tacky. Tick-tacky, tickle-tackle. Super-duper, trickle, saddle. Chill, you should read that disclaimer before every stream. Oh, we're not G-rated. I mean, we're not... Yeah, whatever. It's us. We're like R2X sometimes. But anyways, on with the readings, shall we? Alright. I have had enough of you, workout music. Onward to the spoopies. Go ahead and start this music back up. And head over here. X-rated. Ooh. Alright. So, something that I did that'll make picking this story easier. We're just gonna go ahead and I put several of the stories in this here storybook that I'm about to read on the spinning wheel. So here we go. What are we gonna read? What's it gonna be? What's it gonna be? Alright. The Screaming Skull.
Hopefully it's not too scary.
I honestly have no idea if any of these are going to be any good. But who am I to judge, because I am just the narrator. So I'm not sure how many of these we're going to be able to get done tonight. But we're going to do our damnedest to focus on what we need to focus on. The story. So how are the audio levels? Am I coming in, or am I being overpowered by the music? Microphone check 1 2 1 2. I think everything should be fine. Should be good. You're coming in loud and clear. Hopefully not too loud, but very much clear. Is it clear? I had a professor in pharmacy school that after every slide that he would talk about, he would end with, "Is it clear? Okay." He sounded vaguely like Mario. It was really funny. Alright. We are sufficiently warmed up. We have picked the story. It is time for reading. So I was thinking, when it comes to serious and spooky, doing a deeper voice is more appropriate, and I feel like it lends itself to the story more. It feels more organic than if I were to be more peppy. Like, this is more of my once upon a time in a kingdom far, far away. But this one is The Screaming Skull by F. Marion Crawford. So, let's have at it, shall we? If you have any suggestions, sup, chill. What's going on, Dupless? Hey! I am just about to start the story. You're just in time. Don't need to watch me. Just open your ear holes and listen to the yarn I'm about to spin. This story is called The Screaming Skull by F. Marion Crawford. I have often heard it scream. No, I'm not nervous, I'm not imaginative, and I never believed in ghosts unless that thing is one. Whatever it is, it hates me almost as much as it hated Luke Pratt, and it screams at me. If I were you, I would never tell ugly stories about ingenious ways of killing people. For you never can tell, but that someone at the table may be tired of his or her nearest and dearest. I have always blamed myself for Mrs. Pratt's death, and I suppose I was responsible for it in a way. Though heaven knows I never wished her anything but long life and happiness. Hold on. This music is a little bit overpowering for me, so I'm gonna turn it down just a smidge. There we go. Right back to it. If I had not told that story, she might be alive yet. That is why the thing screams at me, I fancy. She was a good little woman, with a sweet temper, all things considered, and a nice gentle voice, but I remember hearing her shriek once when she thought her little boy was killed by a pistol that went off though everyone was sure it wasn't loaded. It was the same scream, exactly the same, with a sort of rising quaver at the end. You know what I mean? Unmistakable. The truth is, I had not realized that the doctor and his wife were not on good terms. They used to bicker a bit now and then when I was here, and I often noticed that little Mrs. Pratt got very red and bit her lip hard to keep her temper, while Luke grew pale and said the most offensive things. He was that sort when he was in the nursery, I remember, and afterwards at school. He was my cousin, you know. That is how I came by this house after he died. And his boy Charlie was killed in South Africa. There were no relations left. Yes, it's a pretty little property. Just the sort of thing for an old sailor like me who has taken to gardening. One always remembers one's mistakes much more vividly than one's cleverest things, doesn't one? I've often noticed it. I was dining with the Pratts one night when I told them the story that afterwards made so much difference. It was a wet night in November, and the sea was moaning. Hush! If you don't speak, you'll hear it now. Do you hear the tide? Gloomy sound, isn't it? Something about this time of year. Hollow. There it is. Don't be frightened, man. It won't eat you. It's only a noise, after all. But I'm glad you've heard it. Because there are always people who think it's the wind, or my imagination, or something. You won't hear it again tonight, I fancy, for it doesn't often come more than once. Yes, that's right. Put another stick on the fire, and a little more stuff into that weak mixture you're so fond of. Do you remember old Blocklot, the carpenter, on that German ship that picked us up when the Clontarf went to the bottom? We were hove to We were hove to in a howling gale one night, as snug as you please, with no land within 500 miles, and the ship coming up and falling off as regularly as clockwork. Biddy bore Beebles ashore, 'tis night, boys, old Blocklot sang out, as he went off to the quarters with the sailmaker. I often think that, now I'm ashore for good and all. Ooh, man, some of these words are really, really difficult. It's not old-timey English, it's just... Read that again. Biddy bore Beebles ashore, 'tis night, poise. I don't even know what accent that's supposed to be approximating. But whatever. Yes, it was on a night like this, when I was at home for a spell, waiting to take the Olympia out on her first trip. It was on the next voyage that she broke the record, you remember? But that dates it. 92 was the year, early in November. The weather was dirty, Pratt was out of temper, and dinner was bad. Very bad indeed. Which didn't improve matters, and cold, which made it worse. The poor little lady was very unhappy about it, and insisted on making a Welsh rarebit on the table to counteract the raw turnips and half-boiled mutton. Pratt must have had a hard day. Perhaps he had lost patience. At all events, he was in a nasty temper. What kind of accents would these be? I feel like Welsh rarebit. I feel like these voices should be English or Scottish. Biddy bore. It's a Biddy bore accent. Let's see here. My wife is trying to poison me, you see, he said. She'll succeed someday. I saw that she was hurt, and made believe to laugh, and said that Mrs. Pratt was much too clever to get rid of her husband in such a simple way, and then began to tell them about Japanese tricks with a spun glass and chopped horsehair and the like. Pratt was a doctor, and knew a lot more than I did about such things, but that only put me on my mettle. And I told a story about a woman in Ireland who did for 3 husbands before anyone... I told a story about a woman in Ireland who did for 3 husbands before anyone suspected foul play. Did you hear that tale? The 4th husband managed to keep awake and caught her, and she was hanged. How did she do it? She drugged them and poured melted lead into their ears through a little horn funnel when they were asleep. No, that's the wind whistling. It's backing up the southward again. I can tell by the sound. Besides, the other thing doesn't often come more than once in an evening, even at this time of year, when it happened. Yes, it was in November. Poor Mrs. Pratt died suddenly in her bed, not long after I dined there. I can fix the date, because I got the news in New York by the steamer that followed the Olympia when I took her out on her first trip. You had the Leofric the same year. Yes, I remember. What a pair of old buffers we are coming to be, you and I. Nearly 50 years since we apprentices together on the Clontarf. Shall you ever forget old Blocklot? Biddy bore Beebles ashore, poys. Take a little more with all that water. It's the old Hulstkamp I found in the cellar when the house came to me. The same I brought Luke from Amsterdam 25 years ago. He had never touched a drop of it. Perhaps he's sorry now. Poor fellow. What an odd way to kill someone. Lead in the ears, right? Where did I leave off? I told you that Mrs. Pratt died suddenly. Yes. Luke must have been lonely here after she was dead, I should think. I came to see him now and then, and he looked worn and nervous, and told me that his practice was growing too heavy for him. though he wouldn't take an assistant on any account. Years went on, and his son was killed in South Africa, and after that he began to be queer. There was something about him not like other people. I believe he kept his senses in his profession to the end. There was no complaint of having made mad mistakes in cases, or anything of that sort. But he had a look about him. Luke was a red-headed man with a pale face when he was young, and he was never stout. In middle age, he turned a sandy gray, and after his son died, he grew thinner and thinner, till his head looked like a skull with parchment stretched over it very tight. And his eyes had a sort of glare in them that were very disagreeable to look at. He had an old dog that poor Mrs. Pratt had been fond of, and that used to follow her everywhere. He was a bulldog, and the sweetest-tempered beast you ever saw, though he had a way of hitching his upper lip behind one of his fangs that frightened strangers a good deal. Sometimes, of an evening, Pratt and Bumble, that was the dog's name, used to sit and look at each other a long time, thinking about old times, I suppose, when Luke's wife used to sit in that chair you've got. There was always her place, and this was the doctor's, where I'm sitting. Bumble used to climb by the footstool. He was old and fat by that time, and couldn't jump much, and his teeth were getting shaky. He would look steadily at Luke, and Luke looked steadily at the dog, his face growing more and more like a skull with two little coals for eyes, and after about 5 minutes or so, though it may have been less, old Bumble would suddenly begin to shake all over, and all on a sudden he would set up an awful howl, as if he had been shot, and tumble out of the easy chair and trot away, and hide himself under the sideboard and lie there making odd noises. Considering Pratt's looks in the last months, the thing is not surprising, you know. I'm not nervous or imaginative, but I can quite believe he might have sent a sensitive woman into hysterics. His head looks so much like a skull in parchment. At last I came down one day before Christmas when my ship was in dock and I had 3 weeks off. Bumble was not about, and I said casually that I supposed the old dog was dead. Yes. No, I had Pratt's voice being Scottish. Yes, Pratt answered, and I thought there was something odd in his tone, even before, and he went on a little pause. I killed him, he said presently. I couldn't stand it no longer. I asked what it was that Luke could not stand, though I guessed well enough. He had a way of sitting in a chair and glaring at me, and then howling. Luke shivered a little. He didn't suffer at all, poor old Bumble. He went on in a hurry, as if he thought it might imagine he had been cruel. I put Dianine into his drink to make him sleep soundly, and then I chloroformed him gradually, so that he couldn't have felt suffocated, even if I was dreaming. It's been quieter ever since. I wondered what he meant, for the words slipped out as if he could not help saying them. I've understood since. He meant that he did not hear that noise so often after the dog was out of the way. Perhaps he thought at first that it was old Bumble in the yard howling at the moon. Though it's not that kind of noise, is it? Besides, I know what it is, if Luke didn't. It's only a noise, after all, and a noise never hurt anybody yet. But he was much more imaginative than I am. No doubt there really is something about this place that I don't understand, but when I don't understand a thing, I call it a phenomenon, and I don't take it for granted that it's going to kill me, as he did. I don't understand everything, by long odds, nor do you, nor does any man who has been to sea. We used to talk of tidal waves, for instance, and we could not account for them. Now we account for them, calling them submarine earthquakes, and we branch off into 50 theories, any one of which might make earthquakes quite comprehensible if we only knew what they were. I fell in with one of them once, and the inkstand flew straight up on the table against the ceiling of my cabin. The same thing happened to Captain Lecky. I dare say you've read about it in his Wrinkles. Very good. If that sort of thing took place ashore in this room, for instance, a nervous person would talk about spirits and levitation, and 50 things that mean nothing instead of just quietly settling down as a phenomenon that has not been explained yet. My view of that voice, you see. Besides, what is there to prove that Luke killed his wife? I would not even suggest such a thing to anyone but you. After all, there was nothing but the coincidence that poor little Mrs. Pratt died suddenly in her bed a few days after I told that story at dinner. She was not the only woman who ever died like that. Luke got the doctor over from the next parish, and they agreed that she died of something the matter with her heart. Why not? It's common enough. Of course, there was a ladle. I never told anybody about that, and it made me start when I found it in the cupboard in the bedroom. It was new, too. A little tinned iron ladle that had not been in the fire more than once or twice, and there was some lead in that had been melted and stuck to the bottom of the bowl, all gray with hardened dross on it. But that proves nothing. A country doctor is generally a handyman who does everything for himself, and Luke may have had a dozen reasons for melting a little lead in the ladle. A little lead in a ladle. He was fond of sea fishing, for instance, and he may have cast a sinker for the night line. Perhaps it was the weight for the hall clock, or something like that. All the same, when I found it, I had a rather queer sensation, because it looked so much like the thing I had described when I told them the story. Do you understand? It affected me unpleasantly, and I threw it away. It's at the bottom of a sea a mile from the spit, and it will be jolly well rusted beyond recognizing if it ever washed up by the tide. You see, Luke must have bought it in the village years ago, for the man sells just such ladles still. I suppose they're used in cooking. In any case, there was no reason why an inquisitive housemaid should find such a thing lying about, with lead in it, and a wonder what it was, and perhaps talk to the maid who heard me tell the story at dinner, for that girl married the plumber's son in the village and may remember the whole thing. You understand me, don't you? Now that Luke Pratt is dead and gone, and lies buried beside his wife, with an honest man's tombstone at his head, I should not care to stir up anything that could hurt his memory. They're both dead. And their son, too. There was trouble enough about Luke's death, as it was. How? He was found dead on the beach one morning, and there was a coroner's inquest. There were marks on his throat, but he had not been robbed. The verdict was that he came down to his end, by the hands of the teeth of some person or animal unknown, for half the jury thought it might have been a big dog that had thrown him down, gripped his windpipe through the skin of his throat, though the skin of his throat was not broken. No one knew at what time he had gone out, nor where he had been. He was found lying on his back above high water mark, and an old cardboard bandbox that had belonged to his wife lay under his hand, open. The lid had fallen off. He seemed to be carrying home a skull in the box. Doctors are fond of collecting such things. It had rolled out and lay near his head, and it was a remarkably fine skull, rather small, beautifully shaped, and very white, with perfect teeth. That is to say, the upper jaw was perfect, but there was no lower one at all when I first saw it. Yes, I found it here when I came. You see, it was very white and polished, like a thing meant to be kept under a glass case, and the people did not know where it came from, nor what to do with it. So they put it back in the bandbox and set it on the shelf of the cupboard in the best bedroom, and of course they showed it to me when I took possession. I was taken down to the beach, too. To be shown the place where Luke was found, and the old fisherman explained just how he was lying, and the skull beside him. The only point he could not explain was why the skull had rolled up the sloping sand toward Luke's head instead of rolling downhill to his feet. Did not seem odd to me at the time, but I've often thought of it since, for the place is rather steep. I'll take you there tomorrow if you like. I made a sort of cairn of stones. I made a sort of cairn of stones there afterwards. When he fell down, or was thrown down, whichever happened, the bandbox struck the sand and the lid came off, and the thing came out and ought to have rolled down. But it didn't. It was close to his head, almost touching it, and turned with the face towards it. I say it didn't strike me as odd when the man told me, but I could not help thinking about it. Is this repeating itself? Whatever. But I could not help thinking about it. Afterwards, again and again, till I saw a picture of it when I closed my eyes. And then I began to ask myself why the plaguey thing had rolled up instead of down, and why it had stopped near Luke's head instead of anywhere else, a yard away, for instance. You naturally want to know what conclusion I reached, don't you? None. None that at all explained the rolling, at all events. But I got something else in my head after a time that made me feel downright uncomfortable. Oh, I don't mean as to anything supernatural. There may be ghosts or there may not be. If there are, I'm not inclined to believe that they can hurt living people except by frightening them, and for my part, I would rather face any shape of a ghost than a fog in the channel when it's crowded. No. What bothered me was just a foolish idea. That's all. And I cannot tell how it began, nor what made it grow till it turned into a certainty. I was thinking about Luke and his poor wife one evening over my pipe and a dull book, when it occurred to me that the skull might possibly be hers, and I never got rid of that thought since. You'll tell me there's no sense in it, no doubt, that Mrs. Pratt was buried like a Christian and is lying in the churchyard where they put her, and that it's perfectly monstrous to suppose her husband kept her skull in an old bandbox in his bedroom. All the same, in the face of reason and common sense and probability, I'm convinced that he did. Doctors do all sorts of queer things that would make men like you and me feel creepy. And those are just the things that don't seem probable, nor logical, nor sensible to us. Then, don't you see? If it really were her skull, poor woman, the only way of accounting for his having it is that he really killed her and did it in that way, as the woman killed her husband in the story, and that he was afraid there might be an examination someday which would betray him. You see, I told that too, and I believe it had really happened some 50 or 60 years ago. They dug up the 3 skulls, you know, and there was a large lump of lead rattling about in each one. That was what hanged the woman. Luke remembered that, I'm sure. I don't know what he did when he thought of it. My taste never ran in that direction of horrors, and I don't fancy you care for them either, do you? No. If you did, you might supply what is wanting to the story. It must have been rather grim, eh? I wish I did not see the whole thing so distinctly, just as everything must have happened. He took it that night before she was buried, I'm sure, after the coffin had been shut and when the servant girl was asleep. I would bet anything that when he got it, he put something under the sheet in its place to fill up and look like it. What do you suppose he put there, under the sheet? I don't wonder you take me up on what I'm saying. First, I tell you that I don't want to know what happened, and that I hate to think about horrors, and then I describe the whole thing to you as if I had seen it. I'm quite sure that it was her work bag that he put there. I remember the bag very well, for she always used it of an evening. It was made of brown plush, and when it was stuffed full, it was about the size of... you understand. Yes, there I am, at it again. You may laugh at me, but you don't live here alone where it was done, and you didn't tell Luke the story about the melted lead. I'm not nervous, I tell you, but sometimes I begin to feel that I understand why some people are. I dwell on all this when I'm alone, and I dream of it. And when that thing screams, well, frankly, I don't like the noise any more than you do, though I should be used to it by this time. I ought not be nervous. I ought not to be nervous. I've sailed in a haunted ship. There was a man in the top, and 2/3 of the crew died of the West Coast fever inside of 10 days after we anchored. But I was all right, then and afterwards. I have seen some ugly sights, too, just as you have, and all the rest of us. But nothing ever stuck in my head in the way this does. You see, I've tried to get rid of the thing, but it doesn't like that. It wants to be there, in its place, in Mrs. Pratt's bandbox, in the cupboard in the best bedroom. It's not happy anywhere else. How do I know that? Because I've tried it. You don't suppose that I've not tried, do you? As long as it's there, it only screams now and then, generally at this time of year. But if I put it out of the house, it goes on all night, and no servant will stay here 24 hours. As it is, I've often been left alone, and have been obliged to shift for myself for a fortnight at a time. No one from the village would ever pass a night under the roof now, and as for selling the place, or even letting it, that's out of the question. The old woman says that if I stay here, I shall come to a bad end myself before long. I'm not afraid of that. You smile at the mere idea that anyone could take such nonsense seriously. Quite right. It's utterly blatant nonsense. I agree with you. Didn't I tell you that it's only a noise after all, when you started and looked round as if you expected to see a ghost standing behind your chair? I may be all wrong about the skull, and I like to think that I am when I can. It may just be a fine specimen which Luke got somewhere long ago, and what rattles about inside when you shake it may be nothing but a pebble, or a bit of hard clay, or anything. Skulls that have lain in the ground generally have something inside them that rattles, don't they? No, I've never tried to get it out, whatever it is. I'm afraid it might be lead, don't you see? And if it is, I don't want to know the fact, for I'd much rather not be sure. If it really is lead, I killed her quite as much as as if I had done the deed myself. Anybody must see that, I should think. As long as I don't know that for certain, I have the consolation of saying that it's all utterly ridiculous nonsense, that Mrs. Pratt died a natural death, and that the beautiful skull belonged to Luke when he was a student in London. But if I were quite sure, I believe I should have to leave the house. Indeed I do, most certainly. As it is, I have tried to give up trying to sleep in the best bedroom where the cupboard is. You ask me why I don't throw it in the pond. Yes, but please don't call it a confounded bugbear. It doesn't like being called names. There, Lord, what a shriek! I told you so. You're quite pale, man. Fill up your pipe and draw your chair nearer to the fire and take some more drink. Old Holland's never hurt anybody yet. I've seen a Dutchman in Java drink half a jug of Volkskamp in the morning without turning a hair. I don't take much rum myself because it doesn't agree with my rheumatism. But you're not rheumatic, and it won't damage you. Besides, it's a very damp night outside. The wind is howling again, and it will soon be in the southwest. Do you hear how the windows rattle? The tide must have turned too, by the moaning. We should not have heard the thing again, if you had not said that. I'm pretty sure we should not. Oh yes, if you choose to describe it as a coincidence, you are quite welcome. But I would rather that you should not call the thing names again, if you don't mind. It may be that poor little woman hears, and perhaps it hurts her, don't you know? Ghosts? No. You don't call anything a ghost that you can take in your hands and look at it in broad daylight. And that rattles when you shake it. Do you now? And that rattles when you shake it, do you now? But it's something that hears and understands. There's no doubt about that. I tried sleeping in the best bedroom when I first came to the house just because it was the best and most comfortable. But I had to give it up. It was their room, and there was a big bed she died in, and the cupboard is in the thickness of the wall, near the head, on the left. That's where it likes to be kept, in its bandbox. I only used the room for a fortnight after I came, and then I turned out and took the little room downstairs, next to the surgery where Luke used to sleep when he expected to be called to a patient during the night. Excuse me. Rattle ghost.
Oh God, the ghost is rattling.
I was always a good sleeper ashore. 8 hours is my dose, 11 to 7 when I'm alone, 12 to 8 when I have a friend with me. But I could not sleep after 3 o'clock in the morning in that room, a quarter past to be accurate. As a matter of fact, I timed it with my old pocket chronometer, which still keeps good time, and it was always at exactly 17 minutes past 3. I wonder whether that was the hour when she died. It was not what you've heard. If it had been that, I could not have stood it 2 nights. It was just a start and a moan and a hard breathing for a few seconds in the cupboard, and I could never have waked me under ordinary circumstances, I'm sure. I suppose you're like me in that, and we are just like other people who have been to sea. No natural sounds disturb us at all. Not all the racket of a square rigger hove to in a heavy gale, or rolling on her beam ends before the wind. But if a lead pencil gets adrift and rattles in the drawer of your cabin table, you are awake in a moment. Just so you understand. Very well, the noise in the cupboard was no louder than that, but it waked me instantly. I said it was like a start. I know what I mean, but it's hard to explain without seeming to talk nonsense. Of course, you cannot exactly hear a person start. At the most, you might hear the quick drawing of their breath between the parted lips and closing teeth, and the almost imperceptible sound of clothing that moves suddenly, though very slightly. It was like that. That would be creepy to be alone in a big house and hear something fall over. Yeah. I think any sound in a large house, especially when you know you're alone, would be freaky. Especially if you know people died in it and everything. I could see that being a little upsetting. You know how one feels sibilant. You know how one feels what a sailing vessel is going to do 2 or 3 seconds before she does it, when one has the wheel? Writers say the same of a horse, but that's less strange, because the horse is a live animal with feelings of its own, and only poets and landsmen talk about the ship being alive and all that. But I have always felt something that besides being a steaming machine or a sailing machine for carrying weights, a vessel at sea is a sensitive instrument, and a means of communication between nature and man, and most particularly the man at the wheel, if she is steered by hand. She takes her impressions directly from wind and sea, tide and stream, and transmits them to the man's hand, just as a wireless telegraphy picks up the interrupted currents aloft and turns them out below in the form of a message. You see what I'm driving at. I felt that something started in the cupboard, and I felt it so vividly that I heard it, though there may have been nothing to hear, and the sound inside my head waked me suddenly. But I really heard the other noise. It was as if it were muffled inside a box, as far away as if it came through a long-distance telephone, and yet I knew that it was inside the cupboard near the head of my bed. My hair did not bristle, and my blood did not run cold that time. I simply resented being waked up by something that had no business to make a noise any more than a pencil should rattle in the drawer of my cabin table on board ship. For I did not understand. I just supposed that the cupboard had some communication with the outside air, and that was the wind had got in and was moaning through it with such a very faint screech. I struck a light and looked at my watch. It was 17 minutes past 3. Then I turned over and went to sleep on my right ear. That's my good one. I'm pretty deaf with the other, for I struck the water with it when I was laden diving for the fore-topsail yard. Silly thing to do it was, but the result is very convenient when I want to go to sleep when there's a noise. That was the first night, and the same thing happened again, and several times afterward, but not regularly, though it was always at the same time, to a second. Perhaps I was sometimes sleeping on my good ear and sometimes not. I overhauled the cupboard, and there was no way by which the wind could get in, or anything else, for the door makes a good fit, having been meant to keep out moths. I suppose, Mrs. Pratt must have kept her winter things in it, for it still smells of camphor and turpentine. After about a fortnight, I had enough of the noises. So far, I had said to myself that it would be silly to yield to it and take the skull out of the room. Things always look differently by daylight, don't they? But the voice grew louder. I suppose one may call it a voice. And it and it got inside my deaf ear too one night. I realized that when I was wide awake, for my good ear was jammed on the pillow, and I ought not to have heard a foghorn in that position. But I heard that, and it made me lose my temper, unless it scared me, for sometimes the two are not far apart. I struck a light and got up, and I opened the cupboard, grabbed the bandbox, and threw it out the window, as far as I could. Then my hair stood up on end. The thing screamed in the air, like a shell from a 12-inch gun. It fell on the other side of the road. The night was very dark, and I could not see it fall, but I know it fell beyond the road. The window is just over the front door. It's 15 yards to the fence, more or less, and the road is 10 yards wide. There's a thick-set hedge beyond, along the glebe that belongs to the vicarage. I did not sleep much more that night. It was not more than half an hour after I had thrown the bandbox out when I heard a shriek outside, like what we've had tonight, but worse. More despairing, I should call it. And it may have been my imagination, but I could have sworn that the screams came nearer and nearer each time. I lit a pipe, and I walked up and down for a bit, and then took a book and sat up reading. But I'll be hanged if I can remember what I read, nor even what the book was, for every now and then a shriek came up that would have made a dead man turn in his coffin. A little before dawn, someone knocked at the front door. There was no mistaking that for anything else, and I opened my window and looked down, for I guessed that someone wanted the doctor, supposing that the new man had taken Luke's house. It was rather a relief to hear a human knock after that awful noise. You cannot see the door from above, owing to that little porch. The knocking came again, and I called out, asking who was there, but nobody answered, though the knock was repeated. I sang out again, and said that the doctor did not live here any longer. There was no answer, but it occurred to me that it might be some old countryman who was stone deaf. So I took my candle and I went to open the door. Upon my word, I was not thinking of the thing yet, and I had almost forgotten of the other noises. I went down, convinced that I should find somebody outside on the doorstep with a message. I set the candle on the hall table, so the wind should not blow it out when I opened it. While I was drawing the old-fashioned bolt, I heard the knocking again. It was not loud, and it had a queer, hollow sound. Now that I was close to it, I remember. But I certainly thought it was made by some person who wanted to get in. It wasn't. There was nobody there. But as I opened the door inwards, standing a little on one side so as to see out at once, something rolled across the threshold and stopped against my foot. I drew back as I felt it, for I knew what it was before I looked down. I cannot tell you how I knew, and it seemed unreasonable, for I am still quite sure that I had thrown it across the road. It was a French window that opens wide, and I had a good swing when I flung it out. Besides, when I went out early in the morning, I found the bandbox beyond the thick hedge. You may think it opened when I threw it, and that the skull dropped out, but that's impossible, for nobody could throw an empty cardboard box so far. It's out of the question. You might as well try to fling a ball of paper 20 yards or a blown bird's egg. To go back, I shut and bolted the door, picked the thing up carefully, and put it on the table beside the candle. I did that mechanically, as one instinctively does the right thing in danger without thinking at all, unless one does the opposite. It may seem odd, but I believe my first thought had been that somebody come and find me there on the threshold while it was resting against my foot, lying a little on its side and turning one hollow eye up at my face, as if it meant to accuse me. And the light and shadow from the candle played in the hollows of the eyes as it stood on the table, so that they seemed to open and shut at me. Then the candle went out, quite unexpectedly, though the door was fastened, and there was not the least draught. And I used up at least half a dozen matches before it would burn again. I sat down rather suddenly without quite knowing why. Probably I had been badly frightened, and perhaps you will admit there was no great shame in being scared. The thing had come home, and it wanted to go upstairs, back to its cupboard. I sat still and stared at it for a bit, till I began to feel very cold. Then I took it and carried it up and set it in its place, and I remember that I spoke to it, and promised that it should have its bandbox again in the morning. You want to know whether I stayed in the room till daybreak? Yes. But I kept a light burning, and sat up smoking and reading, most likely out of fright. Plain, undeniable fear. And you do not call it cowardice either, for that's not the same thing. I could not have stayed alone with the thing in the cupboard. I should have been scared to death, though I'm not more timid than other people. Confound it all, man. It had crossed the road alone, and had got up the doorstep, and had knocked to be let in. When the dawn came, I put on my boots and went out to find the bandbox. I had to go a good way round, by the gate near the high road, and found the box open and hanging on the other side of the hedge. It had caught on the twigs by the string, and the lid had fallen off, and was lying on the ground below it. That shows that it did not open till it was well over, and if it had not opened as soon as it left my hand, what was inside it must have gone beyond the road, too. That's all. I took the box upstairs to the cupboard, and put the skull back and locked it up. When the girl brought me my breakfast, she said she was sorry, but she must go, and she did not care if she lost her month's wages. I looked at her, and her face was a sort of greenish, yellowish white. I pretended to be surprised and asked what was the matter. But that was of no use, for she just turned on me and wanted to know whether I meant to stay in the haunted house, and how long I expected to live if I did. For though she noticed I was sometimes a little hard of hearing, she did not believe that even I could sleep through those screams again. And if I could, why had I been moving about the house and opening and shutting the front door between 3 and 4 in the morning? There was no answer to that. Since she had heard me, so off she went. There was no answering that, since she had heard me, so off she went, and I was left to myself. I went down to the village during the morning and found a woman who was willing to come and do the little work there and cook my dinner on condition that she might go home every night. As for me, I moved downstairs that day, and I have never tried to sleep in the best bedroom since. After a little while, I got a brace of middle-aged Scotch servants from London, and things were quiet enough for a long time. I began by telling a good deal in the autumn and winter. I began by telling them that the house was in a very exposed position, and that the wind whistled round it a good deal in the autumn and winter, which had given it a bad name in the village, the Cornish people being inclined to superstition and telling ghost stories. The two hard-faced, sandy-haired sisters almost smiled, and they answered with great contempt that they had no opinion of any southern bogey whatever, having been in service in 2 English haunted houses, where they had been never seen so much as the boy in grey, whom they reckon no very particular rarity in Forfarshire. Forfarshire, I guess if this is British. Forfarshire. They stayed with me several months, and while they were there in the house, we had peace and quiet. One of them is here again now, but she went away with her sister within the year. This one, she was the cook, married the sexton who works in my garden. That's the way of it. It's a small village, and he has not much to do, and he knows enough about flowers to help me nicely, besides doing most of the hard work. For though I'm fond of exercise, I'm getting a little stiff in the hinges. He's a sober, silent sort of fellow who minds his own business, and he was a widower when I came here. Treherne is his name. James Treherne. The Scottish sisters would not admit there was anything wrong about the house, but when November came, they gave me warning that they were going, on the ground that the chapel was such a long walk from here, being in the next parish, and that they could not possibly go to our church. But the younger one came back in the spring, and as soon as the banns could be published, she was married to James Treherne by the vicar, and she seems to have no scruples about hearing him preach since then. I'm quite satisfied if she is. The couple live in a small cottage that looks over the churchyard. I suppose you're wondering what all this has to do with what I was talking about. I'm alone so much that when an old friend comes to see me, I sometimes go on talking just for the sake of hearing my own voice. But in this case, there really is a connection of the ideas. It was James Treherne who buried poor Mrs. Pratt, and her husband after her in the same grave, and it's not far from the back of his cottage. That's the connection in my mind, you see. It's plain enough. He knows something. I'm quite sure that he does, though he's such a reticent beggar. Yes, I'm alone in the house at night now, for Mrs. Treherne does everything herself, and when I have a friend, the sexton's niece comes in to wait on the table. He takes his wife home every evening in winter, but in summer, when there's light, she goes by herself. She's not a nervous woman, but she's less sure than she used to be that there are no bogies in England worth a Scotch woman's notice. Isn't it amusing, the idea that Scotland has a monopoly of the supernatural? Odd sort of national pride, I call that, don't you? That's a good fire, isn't it? When driftwood gets started, at least, there's nothing like it, I think. Yes, we get lots of it, for I'm sorry to say there are still a great many wrecks about here. It's a lonely coast. You may have all the wood you want for the trouble of bringing it in. Treherne and I borrow a cart now and then, and load it between here and the spit. I hate a coal fire when I can get wood of any sort. A log is company, even if there's only a piece of a deck beam or a timber sawn off, and the salt in it makes pretty sparks. See how they fly, like Japanese hand fireworks. Upon my word, with an old friend and a good fire and a pipe, one forgets all about the things upstairs, especially now that the wind has it moderated. It's only a lull, though, and it will blow a gale before morning. You think you would like to see the skull. I've no objection. There's no reason why you shouldn't have a look at it, and you never saw a more perfect one in your life, except that there are 2 front teeth missing in the lower jaw. Oh yes, I had not told you about the jaw yet. Traherne found it in the garden last spring when he was digging a pit for a new asparagus bed. You know we make asparagus beds 6 or 8 feet deep here. Yes, I had forgotten to tell you that. He was digging straight down just as he digs a grave. If you want a good asparagus bed made, I advise you to get a sexton to make it for you. Those fellows have a wonderful knack at the sort of digging. Excuse me. Traherne had gotten down about 3 feet when he cut into a mass of white lime in the side of the trench. He had noticed that the earth was a little looser there, though he says it had not been disturbed for a number of years. I suppose he thought that it was old lime, that even old lime might not be good for asparagus, so he broke it and threw it out. It was pretty hard, he said, in biggish lumps, and out of sheer force of habit, he cracked the lumps with his spade as they lay outside the pit beside him. The jawbone of the skull dropped out of one of the pieces. He thinks he must have knocked out the 2 front teeth in breaking up the lime, but he did not see them anywhere. He's a very experienced man in such things, as you may imagine, and he said at once that the jaw had probably belonged to a young woman, and that the teeth had been complete when she died. He brought it to me, and asked me if I wanted to keep it. If I did not, he said he would drop it into the next grave he made at the churchyard, as he supposed it was a Christian jaw, and ought to have a decent burial, wherever the rest of the body might be. I told him that doctors often put bones into quicklime to whiten them nicely, and that I supposed Dr. Pratt had once had a little lime pit in the garden for that purpose, and had forgotten the jaw. Traherne looked at me quietly. Christian jaw. How can you tell? It does the sign of the cross whenever you look at it. I don't know. It was trying to convert me. Maybe it fitted into the skull that used to be in the cupboard upstairs, sir, he said. Maybe he's Cockney. Maybe it fitted in the skull that used to be in the cupboard upstairs, sir, he said. Maybe Dr. Pratt had put the skull into the lime to clean it, or something, and when he took it out, he left the lower jaw behind. There's some human hair sticking in the lime, sir. I saw there was, and that was what Traherne said. If he did not suspect something, why in the world should he have suggested that the jaw might fit the skull? Besides, it did. That's proof that he knows more than he cares to tell. Do you suppose he looked before she was buried? Or perhaps when he buried Luke in the same grave? Well, it's of no use to go over that, is it? I said I would keep the jaw with the skull, and I took it upstairs and fitted it into its place. There's not the slightest doubt about the 2 belonging together, and together they are. Traherne knows several things. We were talking about plastering the kitchen a while ago, and he happened to remember that it had not been done since the very week when Mrs. Pratt died. He did not say that the mason must have left some lime on the place, but he thought of it, and that was the very same lime he had found in the asparagus pit. He knows a lot. Traherne is one of the silent beggars who can put 2 and 2 together. That grave is very near the back of his cottage, too, and he's one of the quickest men with a spade I ever saw. If he wanted to know the truth, he could, and no one else would ever be the wiser unless he chose to tell. In a quiet village like ours, people don't go and spend the night in the churchyard to see whether the sexton potters about by himself between 10 o'clock and daylight. What is awful to think of is Luke's deliberation if he did it. His cool certainty that no one would find him out. Above all, his nerve, for that must have been extraordinary. I sometimes think it's bad enough to live in a place where it's done, if it really was done. I always put it in the condition, you see, for the sake of his memory, and a little bit for my own sake, too. I'll go upstairs and fetch the box in a minute. Let me light my pipe. There's no hurry. We had supper early, and it's only 9:30. I never let a friend go to bed before 12, or with less than 3 glasses. You must have as many more as you like, but you shan't have less, for the sake of old times. It's breezing up again, do you hear? That was the only lull just now, and we are going to have a bad night. A thing happened that made me start a little when I found that jaw fitted exactly. I'm not easily startled in that way myself, but I have seen people make a quick movement, drawing their breath sharply when they have thought they were alone and suddenly turned and saw someone very near them. Nobody can call that fear. You wouldn't, would you? No. Well, just when I had set the jaw in its place under the skull, the teeth closed sharply on my finger. It felt as if it were biting me hard, and I confess that I jumped before I realized that I had been pressing the jaw and skull together with my other hand. I assure you I was not at all nervous. It was broad daylight, too, and a fine day, and the sun was streaming into the best bedroom. It would have been absurd to be nervous, and it was only a quick mistaken impression. But it really made me feel queer. Somehow, it made me think of a funny verdict of the coroner's jury on Luke's death, by the hand or teeth of some person or animal unknown. Ever since that, I've wished I had seen those marks on his throat, though the lower jaw was missing then. I have often seen a man do insane things with his hands that he does not realize at all. I once saw a man hanging on by an old awning stop with one hand, leaning backward outboard with his outboard. If it's starboard, port and starboard, I guess it'd be outboard, with all his weight on it. And he was just cutting the stop with his knife in his other hand when I got my arms around him. We were in mid-ocean going 20 knots. He had not the smallest idea what he was doing. Neither had I managed to pinch my finger between the teeth of that thing. I can feel it now. It was exactly as if it were alive and were trying to bite me. It would if it could, for I know it hates me, poor thing. Do you suppose that what rattles around inside is really a bit of lead? Well, I've got the box down presently, and if whatever it happens to drop out of it, out into your hands, that's your affair. If it's only a clod of earth or a pebble, the whole matter would be off my mind, and I wouldn't believe I should ever think of the skull again. But somehow, I cannot bring myself to shake out the bit of hard stuff myself. The mere idea that may be lead makes me confoundedly uncomfortable, yet I've got the conviction that I shall know before long. I shall certainly know. I'm sure Treherne knows. But he's such a silent beggar. I'll go upstairs now and get it. What? You had better go with me? Do you think I'm afraid of a bandbox and a noise? Nonsense. Bother the candle, Bother the candle. It won't light. As if the ridiculous thing understood what it's wanted for. Look at that. The third match. They light fast enough for my pipe. There, do you see? It's a fresh box, just out of the tin, safe where I keep the supply on account of the dampness. It's a fresh box, just out of the tin. Oh, I just read that. Maybe the thing rattling around in the skull is an egg. Scary. Oh, you think the wick of the candle may be damp, do you? Alright, I'll light the beastly thing in the fire. That won't go out at all events. Yes, it sputters a bit, but it will keep lighted now. It burns just like any other candle, doesn't it? The fact is, candles are not very good about here. I don't know where they come from, but they have a way of burning low occasionally with a greenish flame that spits tiny sparks, and I'm often annoyed by their going out of themselves. It cannot be helped, for it will be long before we have electricity in our village. It really is rather a poor light, isn't it? You think I'd better leave you the candle and take the lamp, do you? I don't like to carry lamps about. That's the truth. I never dropped one in my life, but I have always thought I might, and it's so confoundedly dangerous if you do. Besides, I'm pretty sure I am pretty well used to the rotten candles by this time. You may as well finish that glass while I'm getting it, for I don't mean to let you off with less than 3 before you go to bed. You won't have to go upstairs either, for I've put you in the old study next to the surgery. That's where I live myself. The fact is, I never ask a friend to sleep upstairs now. The last man who did was Krakenthorpe, and he said he was kept awake all night. You remember old Crack, don't you? He's stuck to the service, and they've made him admiral. Yes, I'm off now, unless the candle goes out. I couldn't help asking if you remembered Krakenthorpe. If anybody had told us that the skinny little idiot he used to be was to turn out to be the most successful of the lot of us, we should have laughed at the idea, shouldn't we? You and I did not do badly, it's true. But I'm really You and I did not do badly, it's true. But I'm really going now. I don't mean to let you think that I've been putting it off by talking, as if there were anything to be afraid of. If I were scared, I should tell you so quite frankly, and get you to go upstairs with me. Here's the box. I brought it down very carefully so as to not disturb it, poor thing. You see, if it were shaken, the jaw might get separated from it again, and I'm sure it wouldn't like that. Yes, the candle went out as I went downstairs, but that was the draft from the leaky window on the landing. Did you hear anything? Yes, there was another scream. Am I pale, do you say? That's nothing. My heart is a little queer sometimes, and I went upstairs too fast. In fact, that's one reason why I really prefer to live altogether on the ground floor. Wherever the shriek came from, it was not from the skull, for I had the box in my hand when I heard the noise, and here it is now. So we have proved definitely that the screams are produced by something else. I've no doubt I shall find out someday what makes them. Some crevice in the wall, of course, or a crack in a chimney, or a chink in the frame of a window. That's the way all ghost stories end in real life. Do you know, I'm jolly glad. I thought of going up and bringing it down for you to see, for that last shriek settles the question. To think that I should have been so weak as to fancy that poor skull could really cry out like a living thing. Now I shall open the box, and we shall take it out and take a look at it under the bright light. It's rather awful to think that the poor lady used to sit there, in your chair, evening after evening, beginning to end, and that it's just an old skull that Luke had when he was a student, and perhaps he put it into the lime merely to whiten it, and could not find the jaw. I made a seal on the string, you see, after I put the jaw in place, and I wrote on the cover. There's an old white label on it still, from the milliner's, addressed to Mrs. Pratt, when the hat was sent to her. And as there was room, I wrote on the edge, "A skull once the property of the late Luke Pratt, M.D." I don't quite know why I wrote that, unless it was the idea of explaining how the thing happened to be in my possession. I cannot help wondering sometimes what sort of hat it was that came in the bandbox. What color was it, do you think? Was it a gay spring hat with a bobbing feather and pretty ribbons? Strange that the very same box should hold the head that wore the finery, perhaps. Hey, what's up, Toko?
Welcome.
No. We made up our minds that it just came from the hospital in London where Luke did his time. It's far better to look at it in that light, isn't it? There's no more connection between the skull and poor Mrs. Pratt than there was between my story about the lead and... Good Lord! Take the lamp, don't let it go out, and if you can help it, I'll have the window fastened again in a second. I say, what a gale! There, it's out. I told you! Never mind, there's the firelight. I've got the window shut, the bolt was only half down. Was the box blown off the table? Where the deuce is it? There. That won't open again, for I've put up the bar. Good dodge, an old-fashioned bar. There's nothing like it. Now you found the bandbox while I... Now, you find the bandbox while I light the lamp. Confound those wretched matches. Yes, a pipe spill is better. It must lighten the fire. Hadn't thought of it. Thank you. There we are again. Now, where's the box? Yes, put it back on the table, and we'll open it. That's the first time I've ever known the wind to burst the window open. Sorry. That's the first time I've ever known the wind to burst the window open. But it was partly carelessness on my own part when I last shut it. Yes, of course I heard the scream. It seemed to go all around the house before it broke in at the window. That proves that it's always been the wind and nothing else, doesn't it? When it was not the wind, it was my imagination. I've always been very imaginative. I must have been, though I did not know it. As we grow older, we understand ourselves better, don't you know? I'll have a drop of the Hulstkamp. I'll have a drop of the Hulstkamp, neat, by way of an exception, since you are filling your glass. That damp gust chilled me, and with my rheumatic tendency, I'm very much afraid of a chill, for the cold sometimes seems to stick in my joints all winter when it comes and gets in. By George, that's the stuff. I'll just light a fresh pipe now that everything is snug again, and then we'll open the box. I'm so glad we heard that last scream together, with the skull here on the table between us, for a thing cannot possibly be in two places at the same time, and the noise most certainly came from outside, as any noise that wind makes must. You thought you heard the scream through the room after the window was burst open? Oh, yes, so did I. But that was natural enough when everything was open. Of course we heard that before the Of course we heard the wind. What could one expect? Look here, please. I want you to see the seal intact before we open the box together. Will you take my glasses? No, you have your own. All right, the seal is sound, you see, and you can read the words on the motto easily. Sweet and low, that's it. Because the poem goes on, Wind of the Western Sea, and says, blow him again to me, and all that. Here is the seal on my watch chain, where it's hung for more than 40 years. My poor little wife gave it to me when I was courting. And I would never had any other. It was just like her to think of those words. She was always fond of Tennyson. It's no use to cut the string, for it's fastened to the box. So I'll just break the wax and untie the knot, and afterwards we'll seal it up again. You see, I like to feel that the thing is safe in its place and that nobody can take it out. Not that I should suspect Traherne of meddling with it, but I always feel that he knows a lot more than he tells me. You see, I've managed it without breaking the string, though when I fastened it, I never expected to open the bandbox again. The lid comes off easy enough. There. Now look. What? Nothing in it. Empty. It's gone, man. The skull is gone. No, there's nothing the matter with me. I'm only trying to collect my thoughts. It's so strange. I'm positively certain that it was inside when I put on the seal last spring. I can't have imagined it. It's utterly impossible. If I ever took a stiff glass with a friend now and then, I would admit that I might have made some idiotic mistake when I'd taken too much. But I don't, and I never did. A pint of ale at supper and half a go of rum at bedtime was the most I've ever taken in my good days. I believe it's always we sober fellows who get rheumatism and gout. Yet there was my seal, and there is the empty bandbox. That's plain enough. He broke the seal while the zipper was still closed, a fancy way of saying he peed his pants like Miles Davis. I say, I don't like this. It's not right. There's something wrong about it, in my opinion. You needn't talk to me about supernatural manifestations, for I don't believe in them. Not a little bit. Somebody must have tampered with the seal and stolen the skull. Sometimes Traherne must have taken the seal. Sometimes when I go out to work in the garden in summer, I leave my watch and chain on the table. Traherne must have taken the seal then and used it, for he would be quite sure that it should not come in for at least an hour, that I should not come in for at least an hour. If it was not Traherne, oh, don't talk to me about the possibility that the thing has gone out by itself. If it has, it must be somewhere about the house, in some out-of-the-way corner, waiting. We may come upon it anywhere, waiting for us, don't you know? Just waiting, in the dark. Then it will scream at me. It will shriek at me in the dark, for it hates me, I tell you. The bandbox is quite empty. We are not dreaming, either of us. There. I turn it upside down. What's that? Something fell out as I turned it over. It's on the floor. It's near your feet. I know it is, and we must find it. Help me to find it, man. Have you got it? For God's sake, give it to me quickly. Oh, hey, what's up, Emerald?
Welcome.
Lead! I knew it when I heard it fall! I knew it couldn't be anything else but a little thud it made out of the hearth rug. So it was lead after all, and Luke did it. I feel a little bit shaken up. Not exactly nervous, you know, but badly shaken up. That's the fact. Anybody would, I should think. After all, you cannot say that it's fear of the thing, for I went up and brought it down. At least, I believed I was bringing it down, and that's the same thing. And by George, rather than give in to such silly nonsense, I'll take the box upstairs again and put it back in its place. It's not that. It's the certainty that the poor little woman came to her end in that way. By my fault. Because I told the story. That's what is so dreadful. Somehow, I had always hoped that I should never be quite sure of it. But there's no doubting it now. Look at that! Look at it! The little lump of lead with no particular shape. Think of what it did, man. Doesn't it make you shiver? He gave her something to make her sleep, of course, but there must have been one moment of awful agony. Think of having boiling lead poured into your brain. Think of it. She was dead before she could scream. But only think of... Oh, there it is again. It's just outside. I know it's just outside. I can keep it out of my head. You thought I had fainted. No. I wish I had, for it would have stopped sooner. It's all very well to say that it's only a noise, and that a noise never hurt anybody. You're as white as a shroud yourself. There's only one thing to be done. If we hope to close an eye tonight, we must find it and put it back into its bandbox and shut it up in the cupboard where it likes to be. And I don't know how it got out, but it wants to get in again. That's why it screams so awfully tonight. It was never so bad as this. Never since I first... Bury it? Yes. If we can find it, we'll bury it. If it takes us all night, we'll bury it 6 feet deep and ram down the earth over it, so it shall never get out again. And if it screams, we shall hardly hear it so deep down. Quick, we'll get the lantern and look for it. Cannot be far away. I'm sure it's just outside. It was coming in when I shut the window. I know it. Yes, you're right. I'm losing my senses, and I must hold of myself. I must get hold of myself. Don't speak to me for a minute or two. I'll sit quite still and keep my eyes shut and repeat something I know. That's the best way. Luke Skywalker? Chill is reading us bedtime stories. You know, for an old-timey story, this one is actually pretty good. I gotta say, out of all the stories that I've read so far, this is probably the most engaging one that I've read yet. Anyways. That's the best way. Add together the latitude and the polar distance, divide by 2 and subtract the altitude from half the sum. Then add the logarithm of the secant of the latitude, the cosecant of the polar distance, the cosine of the half sum, and the sine of the half sum minus the altitude. There! Don't say that I'm out of my senses, for my memory is all right, isn't it? Is this the inner thoughts of one character? No, this is a character talking to a friend about a skull of a supposedly murdered woman, and they just open the box of the skull and it's gone. And the reason why he was so afraid when he found out that the thing that fell out of the box was a piece of lead means that his friend killed the woman, his wife, in a fashion that he told them at dinner the night prior that he had heard a story of a woman in Ireland killing 4 of her husbands the same way, dropping molten lead into their ears while they were asleep and causing lead poisoning. Not making a differentiation between the two voices. No, there's no other voice. The what's it called? This is told as if the other voice is implied, but there's no dialogue in this story. It's purely just this man recounting, and you assuming that the friend that he's talking to is saying things. Yeah, it's a very old-timey story in how it's written, and I don't know if that's how it's coming across, but whenever he gets like interrupted and stuff, that's supposedly his friend saying things to him and then him responding. It's like inner thoughts, yeah. Anyways. But like, not. Exactly. You get it. Of course, you may say that it's mechanical and that we never forget the things we've learned when we were boys and have used almost every day for a lifetime. But that's the very point. When a man is going crazy, it's the mechanical part of his mind that gets out of order and won't work right. He remembers things that never happened, or he sees things that aren't real, or he hears noises when there is perfect silence. That's not what is the matter with either of us, is it? Come, we'll get the lantern and go around the house. It's not raining, only blowing like old boots, as we used to say. The lantern is in the cupboard upstairs in the hall, and I always keep it trimmed in case of a wreck. No use to look for the thing. I don't see how you can say that. It was nonsense to talk of burying it, of course, for it doesn't want to be buried. It wants to go back into the bandbox and be taken upstairs, poor thing. Traherne took it out, I know, and made the seal over again. Perhaps he took it out to the churchyard, and he may have meant well. I dare say he thought that it would not scream anymore if it were quietly laid in consecrated ground near where it belongs. But it has come home. Yes, that's it. He's not half a bad fellow, Traherne, and rather religiously inclined, I think. Does not that sound natural and reasonable and well-meant? He supposed it screamed because it was not decently buried with the rest. But he was wrong. How should he know that it screams at me because it hates me? How should he know that it screams at me because it hates me and because it's my fault that there was that little lump of lead in it? No use to look for it anyhow. Nonsense. I tell you it needs to be found. Hart! What's that knocking? Do you hear it? Knock. 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 3 times, then a pause, and then again. It was a hollow sound. It has a hollow sound, hasn't it? It's come home. I've heard that knock before. It wants to come in and be taken upstairs in its box. It's at the front door. Will you come with me? We'll take it in. Yes, I own that I don't like to go alone and open the door. The thing will roll in and stop against my foot, just as it did before, and the light will go out. I'm a good deal shaken by finding that bit of lead, and besides, my heart isn't quite right. Too much strong tobacco, perhaps. Besides, I'm quite willing to own that I'm a bit nervous tonight, if I never was before in my life. That's right, come along. I'll take the box with me so as not to come back. Do you hear the knocking? It's not like any knocking I've ever heard. If you would hold this door open, I can find the lantern up under the stairs by the light from this room without bringing the lamp into the hall. It would only go out. There's some moments that come across very clear and has a pleasant fullness to your voice. Oh, you slip in and out of it, and it seems to be closer to the lower range of your voice, but not the absolute bottom. Yeah, that's what I'm aiming for, is more of more of this tone, more of this range of voice. But I'm getting like very, I don't know, I'm trying to put more nervousness into the guy's voice, and I guess it's raising my voice. I don't know. Yeah, right there. Like if this was normal narration, but it doesn't feel like it's normal narration. It just feels like it's a man talking in one long, unbroken piece of dialogue, you know? Anyways. The thing knows we're coming. Hark! It's impatient to get in. Don't shut the door till the lantern is ready, whatever you do. There will be usual trouble with the matches, I suppose. No, the first one, by Jove. I tell you, it wants to get in. There's no trouble. All right with the door now. Shut it, please. Now come and hold the lantern, for it's blowing so hard outside that I shall have to use both hands. That's it. Hold the light low. Do you hear that knocking still? Here goes. I'll open just enough with my foot against the bottom of the door. Now! Catch it! It's only the wind that blows it across the floor, that's all. There's half a hurricane outside, I tell you. Have you got it? The bandbox on the table. 1 minute, and I'll have the bar up. There. Why did you throw it into the box so roughly? It doesn't like that, you know. What do you say? Bitten your hand? Nonsense, man. You did just what I did. You pressed the jaws together with your hands and pinched yourself. Let me see. You don't mean to say you have drawn blood. You must have squeezed hard, by Jove, for the skin is certainly torn. I'll give you some carbolic solution for it before we go to bed, for they say a scratch from a skull's tooth may go bad and give trouble. Curious how further practice can find ranges that work for different effects. Oh. Night, Emerald. Yep. That's exactly why I'm doing this, to practice. Come inside again and let me see it by the lamp. I'll bring the bandbox. Never mind the lantern. It may just as well burn in the hall, for I shall need it presently when I go up to the stairs. Yes. Shut the door, if you will. It makes it more cheerful and bright. Is your finger still bleeding? I'll get you the carbolic in an instant. Just let me see the thing. Ugh. There's a drop of blood on the upper jaw. It's on the eye tooth. Ghastly, isn't it? When I saw it running along the floor of the hall, the strength almost went out of my hand, and I felt my knees bending. Then I understood that it was the gale, driving it over the smooth boards. You don't blame me? No, I should think not. We were boys together, and we've seen a thing or two, and we may just as well own to each other that we were both in a beastly funk when it slid across the floor at you. No wonder you pinched your finger picking it up after that. If it did not the same thing out of sheer nervousness in broad daylight with the sun streaming on me. Strange that the jaw should stick to it so closely, isn't it? I suppose it's dampness, for it shuts like a vice. I have wiped off the drop of blood, for it was not a nice look at it. Not nice to look at. I'm going to try to open the jaws. Don't be afraid. Shall not play any tricks with the poor thing. But I'll just seal the box again, and we'll take it upstairs and put it where it wants to be. The wax is on the writing table by the window. Thank you. It will be long before I leave my seal about again. lying about again for Traherne to use. I can tell you. Explain. I don't explain natural phenomena, but if you choose to think Traherne had hidden it somewhere in the bushes and the gale blew it to the house against the door and made it knock as if it wanted to be let in, you're not thinking the impossible, and I'm quite ready to agree with you. Do you see that? You can swear that you've actually seen me sealed this time, in case anything of this kind occur again. The wax fastens the strings to the lid, which cannot possibly be lifted, even enough to get in one finger. You're quite satisfied, aren't you? Yes. Besides, I shall lock the cupboard and keep the key in my pocket hereafter. Now we take the lantern and go upstairs. Do you know? I'm very much inclined to agree with your theory that the wind blew it against the house. I'll go ahead, for I know the stairs. Just hold the lantern near my feet as we go up. How the wind howls and whistles! Do you feel the sand on the floor under your shoes as we cross the hall? Yes. This is the door of the best bedroom. Hold up the lantern, please. This side by the head of the bed. I left the cupboard open when I got the box. Isn't it queer how the faint odor of women's dresses will hang about an old closet for years? This is the shelf. You've seen me set the box there, and now you see me turn the key and put it into my pocket. So that's done. Good night. Are you sure you're quite comfortable? It's not much of a room, but I dare say you would as soon sleep here as upstairs. If you want anything, sing out. There's only a lathe and a plaster partition between us. There's not so much wind on this side of the hearth. There's the Hollands on the table if you'll have one more nightcap. No? Well, do as you please. Good night again, and don't dream about that thing, if you can. The following paragraph appeared in Penredden News, 23rd November, 1906. Nobody can lift wax. Well, that's not the point. The point of the wax is to show that the thing has not been tampered with and that the skull has to be in the box. But yeah, I know what you mean. Mysterious death of a retired sea captain. The village of Treadcombe is much disturbed by the strange death of Captain Charles Braddock, and all sorts of impossible stories are circulating with regard to the circumstances, which certainly seem difficult of explanation. The retired captain, who had successfully commanded in his time the largest and fastest liners belonging to one of the principal transatlantic steamship companies, was found dead in his bed on Tuesday morning in his own cottage, a quarter of a mile from the village. An examination was made at once by the local practitioner, which revealed the horrible fact that the deceased had been bitten in the throat by a human assailant with such amazing force as to crush the windpipe and cause death. The marks of the teeth of both jaws were so plainly visible on the skin that they could be counted, but the perpetrator of the deed had evidently lost the two lower middle incisors. It is hoped that this peculiarity may help to identify the murderer, who can only be a dangerous escaped maniac. The deceased, though over 65 years of age, is said to have been a hale of a man of considerable physical strength, and it is remarkable that no signs of any struggle were visible in the room, nor could it be ascertained how the murderer had entered the house. Warning has been sent to all the insane asylums in the United Kingdom, but as yet no information has been received regarding the escape of any dangerous patient. The coroner's jury returned the somewhat and the somewhat singular verdict that Captain Braddock came to his death by the hands or teeth of some person unknown. The local surgeon is said to have expressed privately the opinion that the maniac is a woman, a view he deduces from the small size of the jaws, as shown by the marks of the teeth. The whole affair is shrouded in mystery. Captain Braddock was a widower and lived alone. He leaves no children. Who done it? All right. What time is it? 8:01. Let's see. That was a good story. I enjoyed that. Itchy foot, foot. Hi, ratter tatter. Hi, ratter tatter. Glover time, me. Alright, I am going to spin the wheel of morality again, and we will have one more story and then end the stream. The Dead Smile. Let's see, where's it at? The Dead Smile. Let's hold on. Let me look at all these and see if there's one that is shorter. Because that one was almost 20 pages. So it took a bit to read. So let me see if I can find another one that I could read in like an hour. Do any of these look interesting to y'all? Wheel of Morality, turn. Tell us the story that we should learn. I see no screen, but can hear. I think that's just you. I've got the stream up on my phone, and I can see it just fine. Any of these sound interesting? Do. What about The Premature Burial by Edgar Allan Poe? How does that sound to y'all? Yeah. Let's see, what kind of voice should this be in? I know that he was an American author, but I'm trying to see, because I know that the last story that I did, the vernacular implied that it was an English story. Let me see here. Sorry. What about the thing in the bucket? Space-time continuum. Let's read The Thing in the Bucket, shall we? The Thing in the Bucket. The Thing in the Bucket by Eric Esser. Actually, first I am going to take a very quick potty break. So please bear with me, and then I will come back and read The Thing in the Bucket. Do where is that shit? Alright, I gotta mute that. Hello. I do want to thank you guys for offering the feedback. Trinket is here with me because things are too scary. I think another reason why my timbre and my voice started to go was purely because I just read like a, what was it, 18, 20 page something or other story as my first story. Ooh. And yeah, I think my voice just kind of started to go a bit. But I had a couple of olives. I drank some water, and I've got a nice cold beer to help soothe my throat. Actually, you haven't been doing this long enough to have consistency. Don't worry about it. That's also true. God, I just started doing this in August, didn't I? Are you guys enjoying it? Sip some honey tea while reading. That's a good idea, actually, Toko. Are you guys enjoying the stories? I know it's a lot different than what we normally do, but yeah, I feel like I really just need to practice this kind of thing. Ugh. Anyways, speaking of stories, also new stories are hard. New stories are hard to sight read with good intonation. Yeah, and not only that, these are like old-timey stories, so like trying to figure out what the hell they were trying to say can be a little bit difficult. Chill, read Glover. Alright. I'm gonna try and read this story in a deeper British accent, because it seems like it might be. The Thing in the Bucket by Eric Esser. Wherever the villagers of Drumby Hole fell ill, the weak-minded among them sought the cunning woman who lived out past the Long Mynd. But good Christians went to Alexander Pritchard's barbershop across the village green. Pritchard's medicinals did not have the power of the cunning woman's, but he was adept with a lance and could bleed most infirmities away. Villagers with colds or infections, or deep sorrows of the heart, came to him to drain the darkness from them. Blood often spilled from the Pritchard's bowl as he worked, or sprayed when he made fresh incisions, so every evening, after closing, he cleaned the floor of his shop before the village cats got to it. One winter's evening, just as he was finishing, Sarah Penny, a young barmaid at the village tavern, knocked on the door. She was a blossoming girl of 13, not yet old enough to know what power her beauty would have over men. Her hair was long and flaxen, and her skin so supple it glowed even in the waning light. You're practicing routinely, which is more than most people will ever do. True. Yeah, I'm kind of uncomfortable right now too, but let's see where this is going. Her hair was long and flaxen, and her skin so supple it glowed in the evening, even in the waning light. She had always been kind to Pritchard on those occasions when he'd when he'd supped at the tavern alone. I guess that's an old term for supper. Had supper. Pritchard was awkward among women, but Sarah made him feel as if it didn't matter. She wasn't like that older maid. There was no judgment in her. This evening, Pritchard almost did not recognize her. She looked up at him with eyes wide, like a dog that had been beaten by its master for some reason it didn't understand. "Do you need to sit down?" he asked. She nodded. He took her hand and guided her to a big barber's chair and brought her a cup of ginger tea. She had a faint sallowness beneath her eyes from too much black bile secreted by the gallbladder. Something had frightened her. "Are you all right?" She whispered. "I'm bleeding." Pritchard dealt in the art of bleed, so it was unsurprising she had come to him. "Can you show me?" from inside. She pressed her belly, then brushed at her petticoat. Pritchard considered Sarah's young age and the air of shame, and then smiled. You mean it's worse than usual, or at the wrong time? What do you mean? The time of the month you bleed. She stared at him blankly. Was it possible she did not know? Her parents had died some years before, so she had been raised by the barkeep, Elias Grubbs. Elias Grubbs. He was well-meaning, but not the brightest man, and a widower without daughters of his own. Such subjects were not spoken of in Drumby Hole. Oh, God. Between young girls. The vicar taught them not to succumb to the corruptions of flesh, to focus on God when it tempted them. Surely somebody must have taken an interest. The old barmaid, perhaps. Has Lizzie ever mentioned the curse? Sarah shook her head. I'm cursed. Her voice trembled. I hear Pritchard, I think Richard Pryor. Pritchard Ryer. Pritchard patted his head and patted her hand. You'll be fine. You bleed because your womb is open and you're ready to receive a man's seed. She looked at her belly. Will it happen again? Every cycle of the moon. It lasts a month? Pritchard tried to laugh casually so as to reassure her. No, my dear. 3 or 4 days, a week at most. He grabbed a clean rag from the cupboard. See, you can take a cloth and fold it up and pin it beneath your smock to catch the blood. He presented her the folded cloth with a smile. She turned away. She seemed horrified. He was not surprised. Most people found the idea of bleeding unnatural, as if all that was in them should stay inside. Pritchard knew better because of how he changed people as he bled them. He drew away not just sickness, but qualities. Happiness, sadness, good, evil, impure cravings, and saintliness. The blood contained them all, and thus they could be drained away by one who knew the secret of it, where to cut and how much to spill. There must be something you can do, she said. But it's natural. She gripped the sleeve of his shirt and beseeched him with her eyes. Please. He wanted to help, if only because he could hardly believe how easily he was speaking to such a beautiful girl. He could offer her a balm of mandrake for the pain. Barbers were forbidden by law from practicing the arts of apothecary, but Pritchard did anyway. If he did not help the villagers, they would have to risk their souls on the arcane cures of the cunning woman. The nearest licensed practitioner was a day's journey away. But before he spoke, another idea struck him. He had worked with many kinds of blood, from people of many different dispositions, but never birthing blood. The sort of blood from which whole people grew. I don't think that's right. But he might never again have an opportunity, and Sarah would be grateful. But he would require more than drips and clots, and he could wring from her smock. There is one thing, he said. A potion. It'll empty your womb all at once. But there will be some pain. Oh, thank you, she said without hesitation. He pulled out a book, an old herbal with a recipe meant for unwed mothers-to-be. He lit a fire, set a kettle on it, blended the ingredients together, and let them come to a boil. Then simmer. Once the potion cooled, he filled a cup for her to drink. It tastes like wet dirt, she said, and he laughed. He asked about her day and how her job at the tavern was going. He enjoyed the way she looked down sometimes as he spoke to him. Perhaps they could become friends. And then, quite suddenly, the glow of her cheeks dulled to sickly green. Her head tipped forward. He had not expected the potion to work so fast. He caught her at the shoulders and led her to the room behind the shop. He lay a blanket and a couple of rags on his bed and propped the pillow against the wall. He centered a shallow pan of rags. "What's this?" She stared through him in the middle of distance. "Catch as much blood as you can," he said. "I will examine it afterwards to make sure everything is all right." "It's science." She lay on the bed over the pan with her back against the pillow. He sat a damp cloth on her head and let her catch her breath. The blood had drained from her face. It made him nervous. He had used the potion before, but never on a woman not pregnant, or one so young. He ran back into his shop and dropped the crossbar across the front door, and then pulled closed the shutters and even the door of the back room. If there were any problems, overhearing would make things worse. He drew a stool to her side, sat down, and watched her for signs of fainting or seizure. She kept her eyes closed and breathed deeply and slowly. She bent forward. It must be the pain of her womb opening. Her organ began to flow. It was dark and clotted at first, but soon turned glistening bright red. He caught a whiff of rust and iron. He squeezed her hand. "You're doing wonderfully," he lied, as much to himself as to her. He feared he had made a mistake and prayed there were not consequences. "It hurts," she whispered. "It's perfectly natural." She cried out. "Please, it is better if you are quiet," he said. But her wails grew louder, like a gale through the gaps in the gaps of an old house. She gripped his arm, and her fingernails cut him. But it was all right, because it was his fault she suffered like this. Eventually, she succumbed and fell into a deep slumber. But it was hours before the flow of blood dwindled. He took away the pan, poured the blood into one of the measuring bowls, and set it on the table. There was much more blood than he would have thought. He watched the rise and fall of her chest. Even with her flesh turned so ghostly, he longed to reach out and pet her. Her hair was so thick with sweat, it had the consistency of seaweed. It was late. If he could not get her back to the tavern tonight, there would be talk. He grabbed a sponge and a bucket of water, then carefully slipped the remaining rags out from beneath her legs and began to clean her. She awoke with a start. He looked up from between her legs. She tried to push her petticoat down around her waist. "How do you feel?" he said. "What's happening?" "You're all right." She pulled herself from the bed and stumbled through the back room doorway into the shop. Patches of scarlet stained the back of her skirt like a birthmark. "You must rest," he called. He followed her and set his hand on her shoulder to comfort her, but she brushed it away. She fumbled with the crossbar, pushing the door open, and ran from the shop without looking him in the eye. A few of the village cats dashed in the open door. They sniffed around the chair, then headed to the back room. Pritchard watched Sarah weave down the street toward the tavern. He longed to run after her, to explain he hadn't meant her to suffer, but if he left the bowl with the cats, it would be empty by the time he returned. Yeah, get away from the creepy son of a bitch, right? Instead, he scattered the cats and ran his fingers through the bowl, through the warm blood and irregular clots. He raised it to his nose, and fuck, man. He raised it to his nose and inhaled its earthy fragrance. He touched it a little fuck! Gonna skip past this. He was exhausted, but he was to perform this experiment properly. Chill, moving on, please, right? So he took the bowl, found a warm place, and seated it. He hid it on a high shelf cluttered with too many vials and bottles for cats to climb up on. Reaction means it's good. No. No, it's not. This dude is a sick fuck. He went to the tavern the next day looking for Sarah. He dripped in a blend of herbs he used to keep blood flowing in patients who clotted too quickly, and covered the bowl with a damp cloth. What did he do? Smelling blood. What do you think comes after smelling blood, Toko? Because that's exactly what happened, and I refuse to read it because it's icky. He went to the tavern the next day, looking for Sarah, but she was not working. She was probably tired from her ordeal and had to rest. Yes, you guessed right. And then he proceeds to describe the taste of it. Instead, he went back to his shop and checked on the bowl. He saw no change. He told himself he expected none, but could not help feeling disappointed. For the next few days, he did not see her, though he took every meal at the tavern. Yes, he jacked off with the uterus blood.
Nice.
Thank you. My wife, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. I lost my place. Instead, he went back to the boat, took him in the bowl. For the next few days, he did not see her, though he took every meal at the tavern. He sat quietly at the long trestle table and ate his roast pigeon and listened to the conversations of the others. Finally, he overheard someone asking where she was. Grubbs replied that she was unwell, but the cunning woman was treating her. Pritchard returned to his shop, dejected. If only he could explain to her what had happened. He checked on the bowl, and her bright red blood cheered him a little. He wiped down the edges and covered it with a fresh cloth. He inspected it often, setting it out if it was too warm and tucking it away if it was too cold. He imagined what he would have said to Sarah if their conversation had continued. He wished he had talked to her more before that night. Maybe he could have made it easier for her. I have the worst luck with eating while watching this channel. And this is the story he reads while I'm literally drinking Tiger's Blood G Fuel. Really, really getting into it, huh? Oh, you know what? Hold up. There we go. The music stopped. If Pritchard couldn't... where was it? Stop. Thank you. Then one morning he lifted the cloth from the bowl and noticed the bloodline had fallen. The insides of his bowls were traced in concentric measuring rings. He could see it had almost lost half an ounce. The blood was drying out. He needed to bleed Sarah again. It would help her recover and give him something to put in his bowl to stop it from drying. He went to the tavern right away. Sarah's been ill too long. Sarah's been ill too long, he told Grubbs. That cunning woman doesn't know what she's doing. A bleeding is what she needs. Free of charge. Grubbs nodded amiably, but when Pritchard returned later for Sarah's answer, his smile was gone. No need, Barber. No need, Barber. No need, Grubbs said coldly. No need, Barber. No need. If Pritchard couldn't have Sarah's blood, he could do the next best thing. Every day, he saved a little bit of the blood he drained from certain patients and then fed it into the bowl. He was careful not to use the bad blood he drained from most clients, those with ailments like pox or tumors. Instead, he carefully mimicked the blood of a young girl's womb by feeding the bowl only the blood of fertile women who came to him to enliven their spirits or still the restlessness in their hearts. He usually took a pint or two from each patient, and he only needed a few ounces for the bowl. He never emptied it for fear he might spill Sarah's blood with the special properties of her womb or any seed of his that had sprouted. He found he enjoyed the process. Every time he sprinkled in more blood, he recalled the particular lady from whom he had drawn it. The curve of her neck or full swell of her lip or bosom, each woman passed through his fingers as her blood spilled across them. But every night as he stared into the bowl, looking for some sign of life, it was Sarah he thought of, bleeding into it. And then one day, when Pritchard sat down at the tavern's long table, there she was. Yeah, I don't know about this story, but we're in too deep. We got a couple pages left and it's done. And then one day, when Pritchard sat down at the tavern's long table, there she was, Sarah, behind the bar like some miracle. She was pale and moved more slowly than she had, but she smiled as villagers wished her well or teased her for taking a holiday. Pritchard waved and caught her eye. She half smiled, then said something to Grubbs and disappeared into the back. Lizzie brought him his plate and ale. Hush. How is Sarah? He said. She's busy. He was hurt. Sarah did not want to talk to him, but also relieved she was all right. She probably did have a lot of work to catch up with after having been ill for so long. That night, he lit a candle and set it by the bowl. He had a few ounces of choice blood. He fed a few ounces of choice blood into it. He stared into the blood and whispered what he might say to Sarah if she let him. "You're so beautiful." A ripple fluttered across the surface of the blood. Something flickered like a tadpole through the bowl towards the new blood, though it was pale, unlike any tadpole he had seen. Pritchard scrambled to find his magnifying glass. He dipped in more blood to bring whatever it was to the surface, but it was so fast he could not make out any detail. He watched it for an hour, uncertain it was real. But if it was alive, it was alive. He'd been a fool to doubt. He wondered how long it had been hiding in the blood, too small to see. That first day, he was nervous for it. It had come alive so suddenly there seemed no reason it might not just die as fast. He checked on it edging like a bird through the sky. He laughed, and it was it swam a tiny circle. In the evening, he took the bowl to his bedside and set it by the oil lamp to keep it warm. Hello. Basically. It's, probable. This is a very, very disturbing story for, like, all the wrong reasons. Oh, is the stream buffering for y'all? I'm not seeing any issues. Is it working okay now? Rip, stream is back. Ha 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 ha. You guys have to finish the blood story with me. Refreshed and buffering now. Yeah, it seems fine for me too. I don't know. But, this is for the sake of practice, remember, this is not... I never claimed any of these stories to be good. YouTube gods, please help us. I'm just gonna keep reading. In the evening, he took the bowl to his bedside and set it by his oil lamp to keep it warm. He concocted an elaborate story to explain it to the village. He would find it on his doorstep one morning with a note saying a distant cousin entrusted it to his care until her return. He might have to marry someone to help him raise it. Maybe Sarah would see herself in it and feel compelled to be a mother to it. He wondered if it would be a boy or a girl. He fell asleep dreaming of everything it might become. It grew rapidly under his care, much faster than it would have in the womb. Initially, this encouraged him. He was doing such a good job tending it. He stopped taking meals at the tavern because he was afraid to leave it alone for long, and because Sarah disappeared whenever he was there. Also, the judgmental looks from Grubbs and Lizzie made him uncomfortable. Really, Ratter? He called it my little one, and every night when he took it to his bedside, he told it a story. He told it stories. Did he tell him this story? Fuck. I'm so glad that this is the story that we're ending on so that you guys can have pleasant dreams. Tales of fairies who lived beneath the barrows and sirens who seduced men to their doom. He heard it sometimes, tales slapping against wood when he reached a particularly satisfying moment. When he dimmed the light to turn in for the night, it sloshed about because, just like him, it must not want the evening to end. He sang a lullaby over the bowl until it stilled. 3 weeks later, he put several pints he had saved from his choice lady patients into a pot, then poured in the contents of the bowl. His little one plopped down quickly, but he caught a glimpse of sleek flesh and arms stretched out like elegant fins with dainty fingers on the end. He laughed aloud. It was beautiful. He hoped it was a she, he decided. I don't want him to have a girl. But then it became too large for the pot, and banged back and forth against either side of it whenever the blood grew stale. He moved it into a bucket, which required a great deal more blood to fill and keep full. He made most of his money from shaves and haircuts and dental extractions. He performed perhaps a dozen bloodlettings a week. It was not enough. He waited outside the tavern for Sarah on market day. He had seen her shopping among the stalls and thought she rarely failed to go. He needed to talk to her. She had what his little one needed, if only she would give it to him. His coon baby has grown too much. Little girl, She appeared at the window on the second story and looked on him in the street. He waved and gestured for her to come down. Lizzie appeared behind her and drew her away. Grubbs came out. "Best keep taking your meals in the shop for a while, eh, Barbara?" he said. Pritchard understood. Sarah had not yet forgiven him. It should not have surprised him, but he had his little one. He took his responsibility as a healer very seriously, but when the next of his special ladies returned for the bleeding, he took 4 pints instead of 1. Her face passed from pale to green, and looked as lost as Sarah's had that first evening. He fed her an apricot pastry from Goodrich's bakery, so she wouldn't faint. But she still had to sit quietly in his barber shop for a few hours, staring listlessly into space. "What happened to Nellie?" asked one of Pritchard's best customers as he examined her with a cocked eyebrow before sitting down for a trim. Pritchard could tell what he really wanted to know was whether the next time he fell ill, it would happen to him too. As much as it pained Pritchard, he bled more from each of his special ladies, but they fared no better. In the end, he had no choice but to use men's blood. He only occasionally treated gentlemen clients without serious illness who took the bleed to improve their overall disposition and vigor, but villagers were in and out of his shop all day. Mostly men come for a shave. "You've got a certain jaundice beneath the skin," he'd say to them. "I'd recommend we take a pint if you have time." Not many agreed. It was easier if one of the special ladies recovered in the corner so they could leer at her as they bled. Some tried to joke with him about how best to treat a woman in such a stupor. The men's blood. If someone lost 4 pints of blood, that seems like a lot. It would probably make you pass out, but I don't think you would die from it. Especially if it's a controlled bleed. He felt dirty as he poured their blood into the bucket with that of his special ladies. His little one at first dashed towards the blood, then shivered and sulked into the deep recesses of the bucket. He lured it towards the surface by dimming the lights and singing a lullaby, but it rose reluctantly. He felt as if this new blood made it suspicious of him, but it was like the bucket had a hole he could not see. He did not know where all the blood went. The bloodline was always descending, his little one always growing bigger, and it cried out when the blood lowered too far. He heard it in his shop as he held a straight razor to a client's cheek, like the squeal of a goat having its throat cut. "Probably just one of the cats gotten into something," Pritchard said as he ran back with no blood to give it. After a moment's hesitation, he opened his own artery and drained a pint. When he stumbled back to his clients in a fog, he realized he would never be able to do it often enough to make any difference. He agonized over what to do. He could not let it die. He loved it, and he thought it loved him too. He could not think of anything but feeding it all the blood he had. He fed it blood from patients with dropsy and infection and deep melancholy. He did not want to, for he knew what darkness such blood contained. He knew in theory he could bleed away not only darkness, but light, but none of his training or sources explained the mechanics of that process. Indeed, to transform a person in such a way would be an abomination. He would have done it if he knew how. His little one cried out when he fed it the bad blood, the dirty blood, and coughed it up many times before swallowing. It shook with a seizure, or rammed itself into the side of the bucket hard enough that the blood leaked from between the staves. Pritchard came to the bedroom. Pritchard came to his bedroom and found blood splattered across the walls and a thick black sludge that smelled of bile. He sat on a stool, leaned over the bucket, and sang to it. The bucket vibrated. Raid breathing? No! Pritchard came to his bedroom and found blood splattered across the walls and a thick black sludge that smelled of bile. He sat on his stool, leaned over the bucket, and sang to it. The bucket vibrated with a deep moan he felt more than heard. Once or twice his little one flitted toward the surface. The blood was thick and opaque, and his little one moved quickly. But he could have sworn its flesh was harder and rougher than it had been. Rougher than a baby's should have been. He turned his gaze from the bucket. He was doing this to his little one. He transformed it. It transformed as it brought what he fed it to life. He lay awake that night, listening, bucket near the side of his bed. Sometimes he thought he heard it crying. He needed healthier blood, but he could not draw any more from his patients and could hardly ask for volunteers. He wished there were some way to restore his little one to Sarah's womb. Perhaps if he spread her legs for him again and squatted over the bucket, his little one might crawl up where it was meant to be. After the sunset, before the moon rose, he slipped out to the pastures, lured an untended sheep from the flock with an apple, and cut its throat. He did not use scalpels, for fear his skill might be recognized. He chopped at its throat with a cleaver. He drained 4 buckets of blood, and then ran away before anyone saw. He had hoped sheep's blood might soothe his little one, but it did not. Strange, twisting sounds came from inside the bucket, and jets of blood vomited out of it across the walls of the bedroom. He tried not to look down as he fed it. In the corner of his eye, he thought he saw the irregular outline of matted fur, the sharp angles of hooves. He slept as best he could in his chair in the shop with the door to his back room barred. Every few days he drained another animal, be it sheep, goat, or cow. The petty constable led patrols of farmers through the countryside, hunting the creature that attacked their livestock. Rumors spread of a beast that rose from the barrows when the sun set, but calmer heads knew the cut of a blade when they saw one. Some vandal among them did this, the villagers said, probably as part of a forbidden ritual, and when they caught him, he would hang. The people watched each other, and too often Pritchard felt their gazes fall on him and linger. People who had always ignored him asked him how he was doing and what he'd been up to. When he saw the constable speaking in whispers with Grubbs and the vicar, he knew that they would come for him. Pritchard sat up late with his lantern and cleaver, needing to go out, knowing he dare not. He could not feed the thing in the bucket anymore, come what may. He might not even need to. It was big now, bigger than a baby when it's born. If the bloodline fell far enough, it might simply emerge into the world. He realized he had not seen the cats recently, and had not thought to hide the bucket from them. Though he loved his little one, he also hated it. He hated what it made him do, and the dread it struck in the pit of his stomach. He knew what was in the bucket, even if he had never seen it clearly. Most of the blood he fed it contained only the worst in people, only those parts they would not have if they were perfect, if they were like God. He knew now how foolish he had been to think he could be raising this thing, or tell the village about it. It could not be here when they came for him. He pulled out his herbal with the recipe he made for Sarah and set the kettle on it. It cautioned to use only small amounts of savin and devil's flour to prevent the mother from going the way of the unborn, but Pritchard put in all he had. When it was ready, he stood above the bucket and looked down at the blood for the first time in weeks. It was still. His own face looked back at him. A ripple passed through his jaw to his brow as the thing swam to the surface. He would have done anything for it, and yet he did everything wrong. He thought about everything it might have been, if only he could have given it what it needed. He saw the life that they might have shared, and then that life destroyed. It was like he was dying too. Who would he have been if he could have known it better? If he had not corrupted it? He poured the poison in slowly, for it was still hot, and he did not want his little one to burn. When he finished, he sat by the bucket, sobbing and trying to hold himself in the way his little one might have one day had it lived, telling himself he had no choice, but knowing things had come to this only because of his choices. He was thankful his little one made no sound. When enough time passed, he pulled out a sack so that he could take it into the forest to bury. He could not bury it on hallowed ground, but at least it would rest in the warm earth. He rolled up his sleeves, took a breath, then plunged his hands and forearms into the blood. He had to hurry, or the poison might penetrate his skin and sicken him, but he found his little one almost at once. It was the first time he touched it. His heart missed a beat. Its flesh was warm and soft and fresh. He carefully pulled it out, then set it on a clean cloth. There were no tails, nor horns, nor fur. In fact, it looked just like him. The same crooked nose, the same thin lips, the same little white scars on its forearms where Sarah's nails had cut him. Its face was blue, and its eyes and mouth set open as if in amazement. Pritchard assured himself what a wicked creature it must be on the inside after imbibing all those vile influencers. He did not put it in the sack, but only watched it a while, feeling the weight of his sins. A knocking on the back door of his barbershop roused him. He heard the shouts of many men. The constable called out to him, asking why his lamps always burned so late, and if he knew anything about the animals that had been killed. He glanced down toward the sack, the fire pit, the door. He picked his little one up and slipped it back into its bucket of blood, though it did not sink into it, but floated. He wiped his hands the best he could on the cloth and rose to open the door. And that's the last bit. I hope everyone enjoyed what was surely a fun look at ye old abortion. I don't know what the fuck that was, but hey, that story was indeed weird. Okay, weirdness aside, how was the narration? because that is the bit that we care about. This is gonna be a dead cat instead of a thing. I'm surprised that it just looked like him. Like, just straight up, it just looked like him. Why not, any bits of the mom? Barf. Barf! Yeah, exactly. Okay, but seriously, did I keep a deeper, more consistent voice the entire time? What do you guys think? I think I did pretty good, all things considered. The material that I had to go with was not the most ideal, but, yeah. What, any feedback? Tip of my nose is just so itchy. I thought it was going to be like a weird homunculus, like, thing. When he said it was swimming around, I thought it was going to be a creature to begin with. But I was not expecting it to just be a mini-me. I think you are learning to read. I kinda know how to read. It's kinda difficult to read out loud, though. So that's definitely something that I'm not used to. But, yeah. I should have just read the Edgar Allan Poe thing. In all seriousness, you used to struggle with reading chat. Sometimes I wonder if reading chat, like, I wonder if it has to do with reading things on a screen versus reading things from a book, or I don't know. I have noticed that you are much more able to read sentences fully. Yeah, I would agree with that. See, the thing is, and you can, excuse me, you can ask Radder. I am not an avid reader. I feel like I've actually had undiagnosed dyslexia, or at least a minor version of it, my entire life, to where I like transpose words. Yeah, I think you try to skip ahead rather than read it fully. I think it's easy to skim over sentences without really taking in the information. Yes. And that's exactly how I read to myself, and that's why I find it so frustrating. Reading out loud makes me have to pay attention to what I'm reading, word by word. Because the way that I would read is I would start on a sentence and then be like, I get the gist of this sentence. I'm just going to skip ahead to like what the end of the paragraph says, and I'll probably understand what the paragraph says. And then I read the very end of the paragraph, and I'll be like, I don't really get this at all. So I'll back up one sentence and be like, okay, surely this will explain the end of the paragraph better, rather than reading the whole thing and wasting time. And then I'll be like, well, that didn't help out either. And I'll repeat that, and then ultimately read the whole damn thing backwards, and then be like, well, that didn't really help me out at all. And then I end up reading the whole thing anyways. So I've never really been that great at reading. When I say like minor dyslexia, I especially growing up, I would like transpose letters and misread things like all the time. Like a couple of times in this story itself, I filled in the blank with letters that aren't there, and basically said that the guy ate medals at the tavern every day to see the girl. when they are obviously meals that he's eating. And I would say it was just like an error, like a one-time oopsie, but I did it a couple of times, and I just kind of do that. And sometimes I'll like edit words too, like I'll misread the word palace as place, or vice versa. Yes, but you don't literally see transposed letters. No. But I don't know. Is dyslexia like strictly I see jumbled up letters, or are there other definitions of it? I think it's not dyslexia because when you focus you read well. Maybe it is a lack of focus. I don't know. Maybe that's how I show my ADHD brain. Ratter has a hard time like focusing on things at hand, and has like a billion things going on, and so she never like finishes the one thing that she's supposed to do because she moves on to the next thing before she finishes the first thing. And maybe my thing is I get bored with the written word, but she loves books and the written word. Like we enjoy video games in a also anxiety causes difficulty focusing. That we enjoy video games in a different sense. Like she was laughing at me whenever I was playing what was it? Tales of Arise. The optional dialogue stuff started to really bore me. So I would just like start skipping through the dialogue, or like skim reading the dialogue and skipping through, whereas she really likes to sit and listen to all of the dialogue or read all of the written thing or whatever. And I'm like, I just want to get to the next fighty bit, which also explains why whenever we play D&D, my favorite bits are not necessarily the times where we're having beer at a tavern, or like having a birthday party for some neglected kid, or like things like that. I want to explore the dungeon, and I want to punch the baddies. Brain will filter out information when you're stressed. That also depends on what you get out of the game. Yeah, that's also very true. And I think that's why D&D, by and large, is good for different kinds of people. It's a game that involves like all of it, right? There's a story, there's dialogue that you get to make up yourself, but also there's my favorite aspect of it, which is combat and like figuring out best way to fight something, see if there's like a creative way to fight something. Like I'm to quote a podcast that I listen to a lot, I enjoy Dewey games, and Ratter enjoys like reedy games. So yeah, I guess I can focus in on the words better whenever I like actually concentrate. It's also why the most recent Fire Emblem game was so popular with people who traditionally wouldn't be interested in strategic combat. Yeah, if I were to introduce Ratter to Fire Emblem with Fire Emblem Awakening, which people still say is like one of the best traditional Fire Emblems of all time, I don't think she would have latched onto it nearly as much as Fire Emblem Three Houses, because a lot of Three Houses was dialogue and relationship building and whatnot. But while Awakening also had that, it was very much do the map. Okay, here's some dialogue, and you might have some new interactions back at camp, but not a lot. Now do the next map. Narration and speed reading are vastly different in techniques. Very, very true. Okay, so my reading is improving. What about the timbre of my voice, or just the overall tone, the deepness of my voice? I'm trying to figure out right now what my money voice is, what my signature voice is, and experimenting with different things. Obviously, different kinds of stories require a different kind of, tone of voice. You wouldn't go into a fairy tale unless it was like super dark and dismal, with a deep voice, and make it very somber. You would go in with a "Once upon a time, in a kingdom far away, lived a princess." Like, you would make it more gentle and whatnot. So, yeah. I don't know that I would be interested without the dialogue relationship building. I think that you have a very similar cadenced Egoraptor, and you have about the same range as he does. Yeah, I could see that. Especially since you've also made the comment before that you have to remind yourself that you're not watching Game Grumps, you're watching BSV Live. So, I feel like there is one thing I would suggest practicing. What's that? I feel like my signature voice is probably this one down here. Kind of more announcery, but with more feeling. I don't think I should be talking with my normal, or narrating with my normal voice, because it's too conversational. Whenever I lower the timbre of my voice and get like just one octave lower, it feels more, I don't know, sincere. I have a very rehearsed speech pattern when reading. It doesn't sound natural. I work on developing more flow when reading dialogue. I've always had that issue, and I don't know how to break it. Like, even back in the days when we were doing the reviews, I still had that issue. And I'm not exactly sure how to break that habit. God damn. I think talking a lot makes my nose tickle. I would do some research because it's a common problem a lot of people have. How to break the rehearsed sound. Listen to audiobooks. I listen to like podcasts and whatnot where they read stories, but would that not be the same thing? See how others sound. I wonder also if it has to do with the fact that I'm basically just like sight reading this stuff. Developing flow. I feel like a lot of the stories that I've been reading have been more old-timey and like difficult, especially with how they phrase things or spell things. I wonder if that has something to do with it. You wouldn't develop a video game without playing video games. True. Maybe with more reading can help. Gotta listen to audiobooks if you want to narrate audiobooks. Maybe continuing to practice this will help out. Let me ask you this. Is it so bad that it like completely like detracts away from the narration, or is it just like I slip into that every so often and you notice it? The English language is very musical. It has a natural rhythm. True. Maybe I should just do it drunk. I think it's very noticeable throughout, honestly. And not just listening, but paying attention to the details and the intonation affects rhythm and other details. True. I guess I got a long ways to go. Gotta... It's a more narration-heavy story. You just have an I'm reading rhythm. It's hard for me to notice because it's kind of like how you go nose blind to yourself after a while, and then you go around other people and they're like, "What's that smell?" And you're like, I don't know. It's just a natural thing to me, so I don't notice it anymore. Maybe I go like ear blind, if that's a thing. Ear blind, I guess, would be called being deaf. So I think the crux of the issue is that you tend to enunciate every word as it were the only word rather than following the entire sentence together. And it's easier when you speak because you know what you're going to say, so the flow is more natural. Like when they say they rush to the door and slam it shut in fear, maybe increase the pace of your reading and add some tension to your voice. When you're speaking while reading, you haven't fully downloaded the whole sentence yet. Yeah, and again, I have to wonder if it's because I'm sight reading, essentially, instead of reading something, practicing it, and then taking like the best take. 'Cause that's another aspect to consider is this isn't rehearsed. Clearly this isn't rehearsed. And I'm just trying to get out of that habit by continuing to sight read new stuff. I'd recommend reading the same short story or section out loud like 3 times in a row and try different flows or emphases. You said it like this: shut in the fear. Shut in fear. 3 words instead of all together. True. And it's also easier to like deliver that more naturally for me if like I've memorized it, because then it does become a conversation. Yeah, we usually practiced and did multiple takes when doing the reviews. You need to try the Fielder method and do more rehearsals. I think that would be the biggest thing to practice, and otherwise I think you have a good voice for narration. I've always known that I have the I'm reading a thing kind of style of narration. I've just never been able to break away from it. And I think part of it is, yes, I could listen to audiobooks and whatnot to get the
get the idea of what I should be going for in certain aspects. But a lot of it is reading it for the first time out loud to myself issue. Confidence is key. You have to bridge the gap between reading the words on the screen and speaking the words as if they were your own. Right. I mean, that's the whole crux of acting. Yeah, more reps of the same thing with more variation will expose what works better for you. Wonder what I could do. Anyways, I have kept you guys for longer than I thought I was going to, and also reading sentences and blocks and reciting those blocks. Very true. I have kept you guys long enough. Tomorrow I'll be back for more than likely the end of Resident Evil 4 VR. And then on Friday, we will see y'all for Red Dead Redemption 2. Probably going to be the end of Arthur Morgan. Build the skill of increasing reading buffer, knowing what you've read, and being able to flow it from eyes to brain to mouth. I feel like it's easier said than done, though. But I mean, that's the thing that I really got to work on. It's really just a matter of just doing it, you know. I think I am on the right track by doing what I'm doing already, with practicing every week. But I'm just like starting out, and I'm very amateurish, and I know that. So it's just a journey. That's why practice is great. Again, just gets easier with time. Yeah. I would be very, very interested to see where I'm at like 6 months from now, because I've literally only been doing this since what, middle of August or something. Pressing, and you'll learn little things each week. Little things add up over time. Yeah. I think also I'm trying to figure out how to do things like all at once versus like focus in on like something and then make that work and then focus in on another thing. Like I'm trying to think of, how do I do the voices for these characters? What is the right tone of voice for my narration? How do I not sound like a robot reading the words out loud? How do I incorporate all this stuff to sound organic? And instead of like trying to like focus in on one aspect, I'm like, well, it's got to be all together, or else it's bad. You know? Public speaking tips, like from Toastmasters may help. All those little things out over time. Yep. Anyways, I will see y'all tomorrow for more Resident Evil 4 VR. I hope you have fun dreaming about the bucket blood monster thingy. Whatever the hell that last story we read was. Night night. Don't let the creepy stories. Yeah. So, until tomorrow, night night, and don't let the disgusting bloodletting barbers bite. She was like 13. It was fucking. I don't like it. Anyways, good night, y'all.